Hello, I'm Susan Feller, and I'm the curator for Stories Are Made, Loop by Loop, a traveling exhibit of fiber art. Today's conversation is with Grue Shackleford, and I'd like to, as I do in each of the videos, explain why I selected Grue's work. The Clay Center for the Arts and Sciences in Charleston was the largest venue, and it's Charleston, West Virginia. So I wanted to be able to add another Appalachian in the collection. What was wonderful also about Grue's work is she's using tufting as the technique, so that added another loop making skill. Her abstract style was something that also attracted me. And as we will hear through her conversations, how she's honoring her family and geography is the basis for her story. So Grue, welcome. And I'd
Thank
love to
you.
hear you talk about your process and tell us more about some of these pieces.
I would be honored. Thank you so much, Susan, and thank you for letting me be a part of this wonderful show and this amazing group of artists. I am humbled, and it's just been a great opportunity. So, I have a background in printmaking, and for many years that was my modus operandi. But sometimes in life you get a little distracted or a little derailed, and things change. And I've always had a connection to fiber and fiber art, sewing. My great grandmother was like your quintessential old Southern West Virginia Appalachian mountain woman. And I come from that long lineage. And so I grew up a lot around sewing, quilting, and the like, and working with your hands and working with fiber was something that is intuitive and it's second nature. And it historically is a very feminine craft, but also if you really study the history of it, it is both feminine, but also there's a somewhat sacred nature to it. If you study the Norns of like mythology, Norse mythology, or even the weavers of fate in Greek mythology, and even in like Chinese mythology, the woman who weaves the bridge. It's it's a very sacred medium that connects the past and present and carries memory. And one thing I know that we Appalachians are great at, and that we know, are family histories and remembering things and passing on the stories. And so during pandemic, like many of us, I decided to try something new, and I first started doing some small hand punching stuff, but I wasn't scratching that itch. And so one day I kind of went gonzo and bought 2 tufting guns and a frame and a bunch of yarn and some monk cloth. And I went into it blind. And I remember one artist said, if you're going to do something, do it stupid, in the sense that don't get so hung up on perfection. Just jump in. And so I did. And I didn't plan out any of my designs at first. I would take a color, do a shape, and then react to it. And as I did it, I began to see familiar forms. I began to see hills that I grew up in. I began to see the topography of Southern West Virginia, where I grew up. Google Earth views of places that I have grown up that are being eroded through mountaintop removal, through ecological processes that are distressing. But I also began to remember places that I did grow up in, the beauty there, and the recalling these violently beautiful, glorious summer sunsets and gloaming, and just how the springtime would just burst forth without any. It wasn't slow. It was just like there's nothing, and then you wake up and it's there in your face. And they are the oldest mountains in existence. The New River is the second oldest river around. Forgive me if I wax a bit woo-esque, but those are sacred, holy hills that have existed longer than bone, and at one time rivaled heights of the Himalayas. And one can only wonder what memories and knowledge they have, and if we can listen well enough, what will they tell us? And much like their long lineage and stories, my family carries on like that same history, a very oral tradition. I know stories of ancestors I haven't met, but it gets passed on. And it's important to remember that. West Virginia will always be home. I don't live there anymore. And I always have this homesickness for it. So in a way, my homesickness comes out in these pieces, but at the same time, I'm also very realistic about what it is, what it is there. And I make it a very strong point, like, to not pity people from what, like, do not pity us, for we have such grit and tenacity, and you will never meet some of those amazing humans down there. So the piece we're looking at here, this Memory Mountain to Mountain Gloaming, was the first. I ended up working on a 2 foot by 2 foot frame, and then one day I said, no, I need more. I need to go bigger, because I'm gung ho about it. And so I went and bought a 4 foot by 5 foot frame, and I just jumped into this, and I kind of sketched this out, and then I thought, I want to add something else to it, not just so I started incorporating these pieces here you see of slabs of black glass, and they serve a dual purpose of the coal. They are the veins of coal. My family has died in coal mines, and from black lung, it still continues to happen. And it is what it is, but also that they also act as scars, in the sense that, sure, these are beautiful, beautiful lands, but our stories are also heavy with heartbreak, sorrow. It is a hard land. It's rough. And so and in these black pieces of glass, you can see yourself. It's murky. It's not like a regular mirror, but you're there and you're reflected in not just your pain, but the trauma that you hear when you hear your family stories about, your grandfather growing up, one of 13 in Farco, West Virginia, and they have nothing to eat. And then he has a brother who is 18 months old and dies of dysentery, which, I don't know. It's just it's not something you hear about, but we all know Baby Wayne. Baby Wayne was 18 months old and in the 30s got dysentery and died in a coal camp. And that was normal. And it's a shame it was normal. But that's what we carry. We carry it in us. And in this beautiful landscape of the mountains and in our soul, we carry these black ashes. Not to be pitied, but it's there. And scars and wounds remind us that the past happened. So I continue with this black glass. And if you have been to the Clay Center, this is what you have seen. This is known as the sisters. And the sisters are the remaining great aunts I have on my mother's side. My grandmother was the oldest of five, and it was her and her brother, and then her three sisters. And the women were they were these pillars, and it's who you went to if you needed to know something about the family, and if you needed to know who was who or what happened when. And anytime there was a family funeral, when their mother died, Granny, or their father Pap, who was a patriarch of patriarchs, the four of them would always stand in a column like this, like we are like the vanguard. And when my grandmother passed, this quad became a trio. And a lot of something in Appalachian, it's always there's a matriarchy, and it's the women who carry on the stories. And maybe they don't all quilt, or they don't all do a lot of the old crafts, but they remember this is how you would cook like the beans in the fat back, or this is how great grandma Asbury would cook her fried chicken, or this is the true story of what happened with so and so. And they are these living links to, in my case, these living links to a past that they're my only access points, and they're getting older, and one day they'll be gone. And I do them as these, in some ways they're ghost-like, in some ways they're larger than life. There are these ethereal keepers that exist somewhere outside of the physicality, because in the hills of West Virginia are so beautiful and so strange that sometimes reality blurs. And I mean that in like the best way possible. And they have their black glass because they carry on the pain of their mothers and fathers and their grandmothers. And I speak a lot about from a matriarchal line, and a lot of them trauma in the sense of like the women in my family. And that's not to discount that the men in my family have not been through things, and I know their stories. I know a lot of stories. I guess I just suppose it as a femme person, it's a lived experience that the masculine trauma and how that's processed. It's not a lived experience that I can ever fully carry in my body, but it is just as valid. And I do know their stories, and I know it affects everybody. And maybe, I can tell their stories one day too, because they're just as important. This, the mountain gloaming, this one is before I started adding in glass, but I wanted to get really, not crazy, but I really wanted to explore the texture. So there's a mix of the mechanical tufting gun and then going back in with hand. So it was sort of a push pull of, traditional, and then, very quick, mechanical, almost automated. And I love Dolly Sods. Dolly Sods is one of the most beautiful places I think I've ever been to. And so I wanted to push this, and I wanted to explore the different types of growths that I would see in growing, in Southern West Virginia, how I would, you'd go in the woods a lot and you would see different types of moss and different types of fern and how things grew, and it would then mix and mash, and you would come to maybe an open field on top of a mountain, and you would get these mixes of flora. And it is, and it's shaped like a mountain, it has a very that mountain-esque, and with all the different cacophonies of just texture and pieces. And in some ways it is quilt like, though not like your typical quilt, but the beauty of the land, it's a beauty. You have the beauty of the land as this juxtaposing backdrop to poverty and the intergenerational trauma and the systematic failures that for years have always plagued Appalachia. That fatalism. I was born in these mountains and I'll work in these mountains and I'll die in these mountains. But excuse my language, but damn, it is beautiful. And it is like the juxtaposition of the beauty and just I don't want to say ugliness, but there is that push-pull. And no matter how bad things seem to get down there or how bad things are, I always find myself wanting to just go back. This is another piece of the so I continued my intergenerational trauma with series with the glass, going back to this. And so this is my grandmother on my father's side. The sisters are the great aunts on my mother's side. And I was like, well, I should talk about my grandmother on my mother's side, and she's from Eastern Kentucky. She and my grandfather from there, from Jenkins, Kentucky, if you're familiar. My grandfather grew up in Bloody Breathitt, which, if you know anything about the history of Bloody Breathitt, Kentucky, he saw some really terrible things growing up. And I wanted to commemorate her. Excuse me if I get emotional. That she, I incorporate her favorite colors and these colors that were hers, but then, again, these gloaming forms and the weights that she carried as this, again, Appalachian mountain woman. And I want to memorialize her, and I want to remember her, and I want others to see her. And I know it's heavy, but it's her. And she was both strong, but carried a deep sadness in her. And excuse me, I was very close to her. So this was one of those personal pieces, very personal to make. So, right. Oh, and I think to get to sorry, excuse me, I must go back some if it's all right. And then sometimes I make smaller pieces, and these were the smaller pieces I made on the smaller frames. And again, just exploring the nature and just exploring home. And that, sometimes you don't need, sometimes you can just look at things and just, not everything has a gash in it. Sometimes you can see the beauty as it is. And it reminds us that there is joy in these hills and beauty and things worth fighting for. And that no matter how heavy it is, we are proud of who we are. I've never met an Appalachian who isn't proud of who they were. I took it for granted for years, and then when I went to grad school outside of the state and started getting a lot of flack for being this hillbilly, this white trash. Oh, have you seen the Wild and Wonderful Whites? That kind of thing. I began to get really angry and very proud of who I am. And so I hope other folks who make work, other young West Virginia artists and older ones to remember Montani semper liberi, we are always free, and that this place truly is as close to heaven as one can get to. And it's a heaven worth fighting for. And I think that's all I have to say at the moment. Susan, if you'd like to hop in. I hope I didn't ramble too much.
No, so why don't you stop sharing so that we
course.
will both appear on the screen? And I'm going to ask you a
Okay.
few questions. Yeah.
Oh, it's a good thing. I thought I was being visible. I was like, I'm gonna start crying, but
Nope, worked out fine. I just made it
perfect.
your voice.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I really I appreciate the fact that we saw the pieces and we saw the variety, but in my overview, what I like to finish any of these interviews with is some observations for people to go back and look again. So
Of course.
you look at one point and then you listen in the other, or vice versa, or you're observing better. So what I loved in the overview of seeing the variety of pieces is your color. That's certainly what attracted me. And as you pointed out, maybe I would say that one piece with the dolly sods is like a crazy quilt. It's just all those pieces together, and as you wanted, you're stitching them and they're coming together. It did look like the dolly sods. I've been there, and that whole feeling up there, the way the trees are so rugged, the vistas that you're able to see, and then getting
Of
down
course.
the meadows. It's just awesome. And as you said, any of the seasons, but in the fall when those cranberries and blueberries change into those vibrant reds, it's just gorgeous.
Oh yeah. One of the things I loved, I would commute when I lived in Fairmont as a teenager, and would then commute to WVU, and just driving up 79 and just seeing just how the hills would just explode. And every color, and there's without warning, it's just you wake up and it's there, and it's sudden, and it's magic. It really is. It's just so magic, and you think no other place in the world can be like this. This is a magic. These are holy mountains. This is a magic land. This is, and I love that. And that's something that the color just, it's I've never lived anywhere where the color was just so rich and so vibrant, regardless of the season or where you were in the state. And it's something that is just burned into my mind. Maybe nostalgia has made it more saturated, but that's an okay thing. I'll take a little oversaturated nostalgia.
Well, and I think, I hear a lot of people who travel through on the interstates, and, interstate travel does not allow you to really meet the people and know the territory and such. But as you were saying, that I-79, it goes right through the state, south on up.
Yeah.
And you're enveloped by the mountains at some points, and no matter what the weather is, the shadows come and go. Or I love traveling in the spring because you really are traveling down into another zone. So you're seeing it happening, or in reverse. So you're starting to see the skeletons of the forest is leaving, and all those new greens, and then the reverse in the fall.
For sure. Like I said, from Beckley, you would take 19 to 79. So you would just see these, and you would go up the hills, and you would see the ravines and the hollers, all that, and the red buds. And then you would get closer to, like, say, Fairmont, where it's even more lush and green because you're coming down the hill. And then when you're up in the mountains, you get that lovely, lovely mist
Mhm.
that these hills emerge from. And it's, Rothko wrote a lot about that, where he lived. He said he would see things emerge from the fog and the sunrise and then disappear. And to him, it was like this concept of the sacred. And I get that as, I was like, I see that in West Virginia all the time.
Yeah.
That is that Rothko. I was like, I love looking at Rothko because he catches that sublime nature that somewhere in between the transient and the physical, and West Virginia, and I know other parts of Appalachia. I don't want to dunk on, other parts of, because Appalachia is beautiful, and I've been to like Tennessee, I've been to like mountainous Virginia, it is sublime. And that's the best way I can describe it, is absolute supreme sublime beauty.
The other thing that I really like is you're incorporating that black glass. When we hung the three pieces and you showed us the three sisters in a straight row, they, in a museum gallery, they always hang them for taller people than myself. So you don't get that opportunity to reflect yourself. And at one
Right.
point I thought perhaps it would be neat to have one of them a little shorter. So one down a little so that we could see ourselves in that.
Right. And sorry, go on.
Oh, go ahead.
When I did the show up here in Abington, PA, and I showed the grandmother, I made sure that where her face was, and I'm 5'5", I'm not the tallest, but I was hanging it up, and I'm like, people need to be reflected in this.
Yeah.
So you can reflect. So I'm glad you did that. And that's the point, that people, you need to see yourself in it, because it is both a portrait, and we see ourselves in portraits of people, be it abstract or extremely, realistic.
Well, and I think that's the other part that I want people to look at your work here. And also, if they get down by June 20th, the exhibit is still up at the Clay Center, and the entire collection is there. To be able to look at your abstract work, it's not the same as the literal pieces that we see of portraits or mural. But I immediately responded to them. And as you were talking through, if people look at them, they know those are mountains, and the experience and the scars, as you were seeing, or the rivers going through. So it's a subtleness in nature that you are able to convey to us in those abstract, very quick, pulling together of shapes and such. I think that's also one of the reasons I'm always attracted to seeing your work as it comes across on social media.
Oh, thank you. It was just when I started rug making, I just jumped into this abstract, really just to see, really just sort of like to understand the process, to get messy. And then I go on social media, and so there's a lot of rug makers out there, but a lot of them were doing very representational pop culture kind of stuff, which is fine. And I'm not dunking on that at all, because, we all have our opinions, but I wasn't seeing anyone really push tufting into this almost, sculptural abstract, because especially whenever you tuft at a high pile, you can then go in with these shears and carve out valleys and mountains. And then that goes back to my printmaker background. I do woodcut, which is a lot of the physicality of almost creating a topography. And, I'm now beginning to run across some who are like pushing topography and different layers, which is awesome. And I'm so glad that I'm seeing other rug makers do this, because the topography is such an integral part of the state, as well as it is an integral part of us. When we feel something or suffer something or endure something, we get a valley is carved or a mountain is built. And so when I carve these, when I begin to start, when I'm done tufting and I'm laying out, I begin to it's almost like creating a figure, a body, so to speak, and just sort of the nature of building these mountains. I always made a joke that if I worked with mohair, I'd say I make mountains out of mohair, but it's a tricky, I'll leave that one in the draft pen. But
Well, I do like your varieties, and just a quick wrap up. Where do you source your materials?
I ask for I reach out to friends. There's secondhand shops I go to. There's a place here in Philadelphia where I'm currently living called the Resource Exchange, where I try to source as much of my yarn, especially if it's like acrylics or something, secondhand, or if there is something I really do like, I will go to like your independent yarn dealer. You know, so I either try to keep it out of the bin, the junkyard, by go to like thrift shops, hit up friends. I'm like, I know y'all got yarn you're not using. I know your grandma got a bunch in her closet, and they're like, I got you. Or there's some small shops or vendors I find online who make it themselves that I will purchase from them. So I try to be as sustainable as I can be. You know, I've looked into making too, like I sometimes feel the call of making my own yarn, of carding and spinning it and dyeing. And I'm just like, that's a rabbit hole I don't know if I can go to. Because I'm like, once I start, like, oh God. And so I usually leave that to other yarn makers who do small batches and they do it through their own processes. Or again, if it's acrylics, that kind of stuff, I source it secondhand as best as I can.
Great. Yeah, and I think we do have to be very considerate of our own time and getting all the process steps together and gathering the materials. And then you certainly with the tufting gun go pretty quickly, but there's still, as you were saying, then now you have to sculpt it and you have to finish your piece also. So I greatly appreciate meeting you again online. Look forward to a personal meeting sometime.
Of course.
Would like to, you failed to mention your futures. So let me ask that, I understand you have, you know, all this wall art is one thing, but you're considering.
So garment making, I do have a background. My great grandmother did teach me how to sew clothes. And I, you know, in theater, I used to do some costume design, and I love the garment. And I love fabric because you can easily take something 2D and make it 3D. And I think that's like some, to me, like sacred alchemy. And when talking about trauma and talking about places, we carry it with us. We carry our memories with us. We carry our trauma with us. We carry it all on us. So turning these wall pieces into large, wearable, almost like ceremonial garbs, like we are almost coming out of the hills or out of, you know, we are part of it. And, you know, with the, you know, the tufting looks like the things that grow from us. And I also incorporate felted objects that look like fungi and you know, the growths on us, the pain, so to speak. And I'm really in the visible mending, you know, boro, sashiko, because as I said earlier, it's the scars that remind us that the past is real. And we all carry scars, and there's no shame to that. And I like that it is visible. We shouldn't hide that this happened to me, but I am going to elevate it into something that it is a part of me. So, you know, a lot of irons in the fire right now. But hopefully next year have some pieces working, some garments. I've been working with some places down in Philly, the Make Space, which is like a seamstressing place, a place where they like teach, like anybody can go, they teach workshops. And getting I have my great grandmother's sewing machine. It's a tank, 1981, all metal pieces. That thing will never die. I'm gonna have to fire that one up. And we'll see. But really getting into like almost like a ritual garment. And so, rugs that you don't walk on, but put on the wall or you wear.
Well, I look forward to that, which is the exciting part in any artist, to know that you're evolving and exploring.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So thank you. We will finish the video with a final slide that has how people can connect with you. And as I said, we'll continue to look forward to your social media and
Thank you.
announcements for shows. Thank you.
Of course. All right. Well,